what happened was there was a perceived need that was allegedly created. Once the perceived need was overwhelming, the lie was, if you get an injection, you get to take your mask off. Well, we found out very quickly that didn't work. And then if you get the injection, you don't get sick, and that didn't work. And if you get the injection, you can move about freely. Well, that didn't work. So every one of the deal points has been pulled out immediately when the next thing happens. And to this day, I have not seen anybody go, hey, we got it wrong. You're going to get the injection, but yeah, the masks are still on and the restrictions on movement are still on and you can't go visit your family is still on. And there is no framework in reality to engage, which makes a logical or rational engagement impossible.
From the Weston A. Price Foundation, welcome to the Wise Traditions podcast for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health.
Hey, Hilda here. Current restrictions and mandates, the advent of health passports and more, make the world feel like a very uncertain place. The media emphasizes COVID caseloads, variants, and the need to get injections and boosters. But what is really at play with what's going on? And who's behind the fear-mongering? What is the end game? This is episode 336, and our guest today is Dr. David Martin. David is the author of Lizards Eat Butterflies and the founder and chairman of MCAM, Inc. David has a unique grasp on current events and great ideas about how to respond to them. This is the second of our COVID track series. Today we discuss the state of emergency we find ourselves in, the push for vaccination, and how to protect our health freedom. In this conversation, David helps us connect the dots about censorship, mind control, and criminal activity. Happily, David also notes what we can do to turn things around and maintain a positive outlook in these times. Before we get going, I want to invite you to the Wise Traditions Conference. It's just a couple of weeks away, just outside of Dallas, Texas. David Martin will be there, as will many other amazing speakers and hundreds of friends that you just haven't met yet. So join us and prepare to be nourished in every way. Go to wisetraditions.org to register, and I hope to see you there. And Primal Pastures, I want to give them a quick shout out. Is it hard to find grass-fed, grass-finished meat where you live? Check out Primal Pastures. They deliver to your doorstep anywhere, nationwide. All of Primal Pastures animals are rotationally, regeneratively, and pasture-raised. Their meat has no antibiotics, no hormones, no growth supplements. And their chickens get non-GMO, soy-free, corn-free, certified organic feed, no exceptions. And why does Primal Pastures care so much? It was founded by a pair of brothers and their father around a family table as they pursued better health for themselves and their family. Along the way, they learned about the importance of regenerative agriculture, and they gained a healthy respect for nature. Plus, Primal Pastures is all about transparency. They believe customers are entitled to know what's in their food, how it's raised, and who raised it. So there are no confusing or misleading labels. They offer chicken, beef, lamb, pork, fish, raw honey, pasture bone broth, organ cuts, coffee, and more. Order today at primalpastures.com. And new customers receive 10% off their first order with the code word WISE. That's primalpastures.com and the code word WISE. This is Holistic Hilda, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. Welcome to Wise Traditions, David.
Great to be here again, Hilda. So good to see you.
Honestly, I feel like, as I said to you in a previous podcast, the world has turned upside down, and most of us are left spinning. And we're asking ourselves, does anybody have the license plate number of the truck that just hit us? This state of emergency that was instated sometime in 2020, I imagine, is still in effect. Is that right?
Yes, it is. In fact, Javier Barcea, the new Biden administration director of the Department of Health and Human Services, decided to re-up it in July. The great news is there's no criteria. And the cool thing is there's no criteria in the law that says that something has to be met. So just in case viewers or listeners were paying attention, there was another state of emergency that was also redeclared. Did you know that in July?
No. Was that a worldwide one?
No. It's the one that's been declared quite a while. And oddly enough, It's a state of emergency to, not surprisingly, help facilitate an experimental vaccine. But this one is the state of emergency of the opioid crisis. If people go and look at the actual declared states of emergency, what you'll find is that we have COVID, but we have had a ongoing state of emergency for the opioid crisis for quite some time. And that was re-upped as well in July. So the good news is we've got 2 states of emergency going. And just because I know everybody would want to feel better about this, Moderna has an experimental vaccine that they've patented on a vaccine for opioid addiction. So the cool thing is, as weird as this sounds, we have an EUA outstanding right now for opioid addiction. So there you go. 2 states of emergency, one that you didn't know about and another one that you wish that you hadn't heard about. Now I've told you. So there you go. We're in the middle of Oz. And I think it's more of Wonderland, where you kind of go down through the rabbit hole and you come out the other end. And I don't know. I think the crazy one is Tony Fauci is the Queen of Hearts. I don't know. Yeah.
So this is the thing. As long as there is a state of emergency, then these injections that they're promoting and the lockdowns, all these restrictions, health passes, all of this can be justified.
Well, so let's be clear. It can't be justified because it's criminal. So criminal actions can never be justified. It's more importantly illegal because, as you well know, that under the Federal Trade Commission Act and under its equivalent in every state, it is illegal to promote something that is intended to treat, diagnose, or cure a disease when you do not have at least 2 independent peer-reviewed medical studies that prove the claim you're making. So whether it's face masks or social distancing or restrictions on where children can go or anything else, there is no, and by the way, I mean literally no, evidentiary standard to meet the Federal Trade Commission Act requirements. Every single governor, every single public health officer, every single school district is violating federal and state law every time they do it. And there is, in fact, zero, not a single court in the land, not a single U.S. attorney, not a single Department of Justice official, not a single FBI agent, not a single attorney general, not anyone who's actually holding up the law right now. And so we are living in Chicago in the 20s, and it's the middle of the Capone era. You could walk outside and somebody could just drive by in their giant, whatever it was, Lincoln, and blast you with a Tommy gun. I don't know. It's that weird.
It is that weird. Although I have to say, I've heard that some sheriffs are standing on the side of protecting the citizens in a way that none of these other officials that you just named are.
Yes. And, there's tons of people who are doing I don't know what it is. It's a bit of the grasping at straws. It's something where, I guess something in some people's minds is better than nothing. The fact of the matter is there are a number of sheriffs, and, I've had a number of interactions with Sheriff John Mack and others, fabulous people, wonderful people who are doing the level best that they can. The problem is that what we need is prosecutorial, and we need actual judicial access. And so, a sheriff can do a lot of things to not enforce a stupid regulation or not kind of serve certain warrants and other things. There are things that they can do, but unfortunately, sheriffs are not given the opportunity, even though they could be involved in the opportunity. They've chosen not to be for whatever reason. The reporting of and then the ultimate indictment for criminal actions is something that's part of the justice system. And unfortunately, the sheriffs don't have access to that any more than we do. So, the courts were bought a long time ago. Justice Sotomayor just very recently, once again showed us that the Supreme Court is not equal justice under the law. It's favored justice to defer and essentially stipulate the existence of a thing that doesn't exist. And so this is lawlessness. This is sad. And from the standpoint of, a lot of people who just sit there going, well, I don't even know why a person like Dave Martin opens his mouth anymore because all I'm doing is saying the same thing. The fact of the matter is every time I go on record, there's another record that the system that we call our democracy is not working.
Wow. So what recourse do we have if this is lawlessness, Chicago back in the day?
Yeah.
What recourse do we have as individuals at this time to protect our health freedom?
Well, the objective reality is, I feel like Nancy Reagan right now, just say no. The fact of the matter is there are no organizations right now that are under duress And by that, I mean physical restraint, tying you to a chair and forcing you to do anything. That's a bridge that so far is too far to cross. Tragically, there are most of the people who are currently subjecting themselves to the injections right now, tragically are doing so under threat, not under law. They're doing it under threat. And listen, I'm sympathetic because I'm a human being. I'm sympathetic to feeling like there's a lot of pressure. And so at some point, you're tired of fighting. I get all that. But the fact of the matter is injecting yourself with a lethal pathogen is a bad idea, period. There's no job. There's no cruise. There's no flight. There's no trip. There's no nothing that is worth being the guinea pig on a trial that was never conducted lawfully, never had an independent institutional review board, never had an independent safety and efficacy review by an IRB. We don't have a legal clinical trial of any of these injections yet. Right now, there hasn't been a single legal trial performed in the United States under the 21 Code of Federal Regulations, Section 50.20, 23, and 24. There hasn't been a legal clinical trial done. And still people are saying, well, but I have to because my employer said I have to because of whatever else. And the fact of the matter is, no. The answer is no, you do not have to. And if ultimately there are actions taken, whether it's terminating a job or whether it's not having your kid allowed to go to school or whatever it is, each one of these are criminal actions being done by criminal organizations. And one day you have redress. But that day is not today, and it's not likely in the near future because we don't have any court that's willing to enforce the law.
Wow, you've packed a lot into that little moment there. And I'm processing it, but I'm also trying to go back to the regular person on the street who might think, well, I don't know about all the legal recourse I have, but I do know this. People I know who've gotten the injection have still gotten sick.
Yep.
So it doesn't even do what the ads say, which is it's safe and effective. And I even heard someone on the radio the other day, David, actually someone on NPR saying the vaccine prevents death. And I thought, wow, that's a lot of hyperbole right there.
Yeah. Well, listen, I mean, remember that using their standard, which is criminal anyhow, so why don't we use it? Using their standard, this is not a vaccine. This is a stimulation of a pathogen creator. So what you get injected with is instructions for your body to make a foreign pathogen. That pathogen happens to be a protein, which is foreign protein. And the instructions are for your body to make it. And then you hope that your body then attacks the thing your body made. That's what we're calling this thing. It's a bioweapon. It needs to be called what it is. It's a synthetic and chimeric bioweapon. You are being shot. And it would be analogous to going out in a Western. So think of yourself in a Western movie, like a John Wayne Western movie. Think of yourself going out and seeing a gunfight going on and stepping in the way of a bullet to test whether your blood clots. Like that would be a dumb idea, right? Because the good news is your blood probably would clot, but the idea of putting yourself in front of a bullet is a bad idea. And if we had the right conversations, Hilda, and that's the problem, we're not having the right conversations. We're pretending like we're debating on whether or not philosophically we agree with organic versus non-organic healthcare. That's not the question. This is an engineered pathogen. This is something that was engineered intentionally to attack human lung epithelial cells and human vascular cells. This was invented by University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, patented in 2002. This is a weapon. And if we started talking about it the proper way, we would not be having conversations about, well, I think it's probably okay. Because it's not okay to stand in front of a weapon. I don't care whether it's delivered through a gun or delivered through a syringe. Do not do it.
And for even more proof for the skeptic, I would say is looking at the numbers. It has not prevented cases from going up. It hasn't changed that arc. As a matter of fact, I think the arc has gone up in even some of the most vaccinated nations on the earth.
Oh, not just in the vaccinated nations. Just last week, Hilda, there was a report published by the Department of Defense Veterans Affairs where it showed that 71% of hospitalizations in those over the age of 65 were duly vaccinated, either duly vaccinated or duly vaccinated plus booster. So 71% of the hospitalizations, remember, this is supposed to prevent illness, supposed to prevent hospitalization, supposed to prevent severe injury. And of those, over 60% were in ICUs. So it wasn't just hospitalizations, it was severe hospitalization. And it turns out that the vaccine population in the Veterans Affairs database, so this is not Dave going out on a limb, this is not VAERS, this is not adverse event reporting, this is the Veterans Administration's own clinical data. 71% of the over 65 that got double vaccinated were in fact the ones that were in hospital. 71%. So you can't even make the argument that this lessens the severity of disease because the vast majority of people who are occupying emergency rooms and ICUs are currently vaccinated people.
But that's not what they're saying on the news. They're saying it's the pandemic of the unvaccinated. That's their little phrase.
Listen, this is probably the most ludicrous point in human history where allegedly the reason why people who are protected against the disease are more at risk is because the people who are allegedly unprotected are creating the risk. But here's the tiny problem with the theory. I don't know if you saw, but a very sad story here in Virginia, just a few days ago, a 5th grade girl reportedly died of COVID. Now, here's the funny thing about the story. And by the way, there's nothing funny about a 5th grader dying. So I'm not saying it's funny. Not saying there's anything funny about her death, but CNN is reporting it as a COVID death where this perfectly healthy young girl went from being perfectly fine 5 days later dead of COVID. But in their actual story, they point out that she had a negative PCR test. She had no radiographic evidence of any of the COVID radiographic symptoms. She died in 5 days from being perfectly healthy to dead. And now CNN is saying that her parents are advocating that people wear masks and get injections for a disease that allegedly killed their daughter. But here's the tiny problem. In their own report, they say no positive PCR test and no radiographic evidence of COVID. But they're actually manufacturing a horribly tragic story into having 2 mask-wearing parents, by the way, both vaccinated, mask-wearing parents talking about the death of their young girl, and they're using it as a, by the way, everybody should get vaccinated. And I just sat there going, your own story falsifies the story, right? Your daughter died. That's a true thing. And that's a sad thing. And that's a tragedy for all of us. And the fact that you are monetizing it as propaganda is defiling the honor of the young lady that just died. So this whole game of the fear pornography that is going around where people are trying desperately to make every death another moment of the I wish I would have, or they wish they would have, or whatever else. The fact of the matter is this injection does not work.
What about the new ones? What about Novavax? Apparently that's not the same mRNA technology.
Correct. That one you can feel better about because Bill Gates is more directly funding it. So that one I'm sure is going to have no bugs, just like Microsoft Office has no bugs. I wouldn't worry about anything because my history, at least with Microsoft, is there's never been anything wrong with anything that he's ever built. So,
oh my gosh.
You know, it's funny. Unsolicited, Hilda, I got a phone call from the vice provost of one of America's leading medical institutions, a West Coast institution. She called me. She had heard a couple of my interviews. She called me and she said, I've got to tell you something. She said, I am the head of the Institutional Review Board. When we got word that there was going to be a vaccine developed and we got word it was going to be an mRNA vaccine, the director of the Vivarium, which is the animal research center at this particular medical university, came to her and he was thrilled. He reportedly was looking forward to how much wonderful money the federal government was going to spend on safety studies on this vaccine. And she said, you know, they had the conversation and then nothing. And then the next thing they got was a human protocol. And she said, well, this is strange. I was expecting an animal protocol because the first thing that you would do in traditional drug development is you would have an animal study to show safety and efficacy before you do anything in humans. So she asked, where is the safety data from the animal trials? And the quote was, you are approving this. We're going straight to humans.
Oh, just like an order, basically.
This is the Institutional Review Board at one of America's top 10 medical universities. When I pointed out that there was no legal Institutional Review Board meeting, she took issue with it and she was calling me to take issue with it. And I said, well, let me give you what the law is. It's 21 Code of Federal Regulations, section 50.20, 23 and 24. I said, did any of these conditions get met? And she goes, not only did they not get met, but let me tell you the story. And so she relayed to me the story of a willful act of homicide. this is not some sort of accidental thing. The decision to go straight to humans was a willful act to kill humans.
How can this be, David? I mean, it's very hard to wrap my head around this because we have such faith in the medical system and in our leaders to look out for the public health. And it's very hard to believe that someone's purposely trying to hurt the human race.
As long as we've been organized in whatever tribes or populations or nations that we've done, we've always had a view of there is the approved and privileged class, and then there's the everybody else. And the tragedy is, if we go back to the mid 1700s and we sit back and ask the question, how did we get this so wrong? Because, for example, the American experiment, if we go back and look at the writings of Madison and Monroe and George Mason, Thomas Jefferson, Tocqueville, others, we hear about this great human experiment where what we're going to do is see what happens if we get rid of monarchs and we get rid of popes and we get rid of kings and we get rid of all of those kind of crazy anachronistic things. And we actually turn this into a republic by and for and of the people. And so we actually start this thing. The problem is that in 1776, another document equally important and almost totally undiscussed was also published, which is Adam Smith's book called The Wealth of Nations. And the problem with that book is it actually created a new anonymous class, which was the class of the industrialist. And if we really examine what the American experiment was, it was actually a coup where business interests decided to take advantage of a populist movement towards democracy and independence. And if we look at the Civil War, if we look at the establishment of the life insurance cabal, if we look at the establishment of the insurance banking cabal of the turn of the 1900s, every single one of these, and by the way, in 1910 and 1911, remember, the citizens of the United States still had a convening voice that got things like the Peugeot Committee and others to investigate the inappropriate relationships with banking and industry and insurance and all this kind of stuff. And we got things like the Glass-Steagall Act, and we got laws actually changed. The problem is that we've had now a generation and a half. So this is your and my parents' generation, the baby boom post-World War II generation, who have been complacently living in a world in which the satiation of consumption, just getting stuff, has replaced the sense of civic responsibility and duty. Mm-hmm. And so we've been in the business of, our houses and our cars and our credit cards and our purchase this, purchase that, purchase something else. And we've become the consumer republic, not the civic republic. And the problem that leads to is that it leads to a world in which corporate interests are the ones dictating the future. We left the world of democracy when we allowed campaign finance donations to be pharma, eclipsing big oil, banking, finance, insurance. Like, we let this happen. And now we're sitting there going, well, we don't like the world that's manifest. Well, guess what? When campaign finance was being discussed, this was the point. And you know how many of us cared? Not enough. Mm-mm. I mean, we made the mess we're in, so we've got to own the mess we're in.
Right. And I remember you were saying before, too, it's like we're in a new kind of war, right?
Yeah, it is. This is a high-class war. You and I are sitting here on a conversation. We're not having French or British troops quartered in our house. Like, we're not whispering. There's a lot of things that, as suffering goes, this is pretty upscale suffering. But the danger of upscale suffering is it's more insidious. You don't know how much harm is happening when you're not immediately confronted by the things that are actually egregiously going on. The minute you find the person who is injured or who has been killed or whose parent died or whoever else right after getting the injection, now all of a sudden it starts feeling like a war because there's really bodies. But for the majority of us, we're still one step removed from it's not on our doorstep. So we still feel like it's kind of a power grab by despotic governors or public health officials or presidents or whatever else. We still feel that way, but we kind of still almost don't quite think that it's how bad it really is. And the problem is it's worse than that, and we're not paying attention.
Coming up, David reveals a startling quote from Peter Daszak, the president of the EcoHealth Alliance. And that quote points to profit as one of the main drivers behind our current situation.
You're listening to the Wise Traditions podcast from the Weston A. Price Foundation. We pause now to recognize our sponsors.
Cold Plunge. Take the plunge, build resilience, and improve cognitive function. There are so many benefits to cold therapy, and one of the easiest ways to give it a try is using the Cold Plunge Tub. The revolutionary tub uses powerful cooling, filtration, and sanitation to give you cold, clean water whenever you want it, making it far superior to an ice bath or chest freezer. The plunge is safe for indoor or outdoor use, and installation is truly plug and plunge. You fill the plunge up with a hose, turn it on, and set your temperature, and you're all set. You can also turn it into a hot tub by turning the temperature up. So visit the website, thecoldplunge.com, and place your order now. I am so glad I'm taking the plunge with this fantastic tub, and you can do it too. Go to thecoldplunge.com and use the code WISE for $111 off on your order. Again, thecoldplunge.com and the code word WISE. An optimal carnivore. Organ meats are some of the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet. The guys over at Optimal Carnivore believe that everyone deserves easy access to the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet, and they wanted to take the guesswork and hassle out of eating organ meat. So they started sourcing 100% grass-fed organ meats from New Zealand. They freeze-dry the organs and encapsulate them into convenient bovine gelatin capsules. They do the freeze-drying, by the way, to preserve all the vitamins, minerals, proteins, and enzymes. And they chose New Zealand-sourced meats because it is a pure source. The products are 100% grass-fed and grass-finished and free of hormones, pesticides, antibiotics, and GMOs. Our ancestors would have eaten the whole animal. So, Optimal Carnivore has created this unique blend of 9 different organs, a powerful combination including beef liver, brain, thymus, heart, kidney, spleen, pancreas, lung, and gallbladder. It's a real nose-to-tail solution. And each organ contains its own unique benefits and nutritional profile and provides a large range of nutrients that support all our major organs and glands. So these supplements are perfect for taking when you're on the go or still trying to develop an appreciation for organ meats. Currently, you can find from Optimal Carnivore a grass-fed organ complex, a grass-fed bone marrow, and a grass-fed liver product. And a side note, Optimal Carnivore also plants 1 tree for every product sold, which helps the environment. Go to amazon.com/optimalcarnivore and use the code Weston10 to save 10% on all products. Again, that's amazon.com/optimalcarnivore and use the code Weston10 to save 10%. This is Holistic Hilda, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. You said, here we are talking freely, which is true, but there's also a lot of censorship. So some people are not immediately confronted with what's happening because it's being kept from them.
Well, look at the fact that there's a very interesting Massachusetts court decision that happened very early in COVID. And unfortunately, the Massachusetts court ruled in error because they made the assumption that social media is in fact a proxy for the freedom of assembly and the freedom of speech. Now, the judge can be forgiven because up until the spring of 2020, the idea that you would be deplatformed from Facebook or YouTube or whatever, that idea was actually pretty remote.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that there would be no, and I don't mean a little bit, I mean no press coverage at all of the fact that Peter Daszak in 2015 said that he needed the public to accept, and I'm quoting from him now, the public to accept a medical countermeasure such as a pan-coronavirus vaccine. We need the media to create the hype, and we need to use the hype to our advantage to get to the real issues. Investors will follow if they see profit at the end of the process. That statement made by Peter Daszak in 2015, printed on the 2nd of February or 6th of February 2016, and published in the National Academy of Sciences Proceedings. So this is not some slouch kind of heard it on a tabloid in a grocery store. This is the National Academy of Sciences Proceedings. He made that statement, and not a single public media outlet has ever reported the public statement that he made where he said, we need, quote, the media to create the hype. We need to use the hype to our advantage. Investors will follow if they see profit at the end of the process. This is the guy who during exactly that same period was sending money from the United States through EcoHealth Alliance to Wuhan Institute of Virology to do gain-of-function research on coronavirus. That's the same guy, and not one media outlet has ever reported on what I just said.
Oh my goodness. Well, I hope this gets out there now. And even so, I have this feeling, David, that people are so indoctrinated by the media hype that they can't even make room in their heads for something that will shift their paradigm to see more clearly what's happening right now.
Well, I have said many times, and unfortunately I'm a broken record, but I'm going to keep being a broken record about this. And that's even a bad analogy because now people don't even know what a record is. But I am a broken record, and it's going to be that way for the rest of time, because what I'm going to keep saying is that until Fauci is in cuffs, I mean, literally the perp walk, until that happens, I don't think you can break through exactly your point, Hilda. The mind control is so complete that unless we show them to be the criminal felons that they are, we don't have a chance. Because the fact is that once you've made a horrible decision, and by the way, we remember this when we're kids, oftentimes we'll make a bad decision, and then when confronted with the evidence of the bad decision, what we do is dig in. Mm-hmm. We get more militant about the rightness of our wrongness. And so we dig in more. And that's exactly what's happening. Nobody wanted this vaccine. Nobody woke up one day going, I can't wait for the next vaccine. What happened was there was a perceived need that was allegedly created. Once the perceived need was overwhelming, the lie was, if you get injection, you get to take your mask off. Well, we found out very quickly that didn't work. Mm-mm. And then if you get the injection, you don't get sick, and that didn't work. And if you don't get if you get the injection, you can move about freely. Well, that didn't work. So every one of the deal points has been pulled out immediately when the next thing happens. And to this day, I have not seen anybody go, hey, we got it wrong. You're going to get the injection, but yeah, the masks are still on, and the restrictions on movement are still on, and you can't go visit your family is still on. And there is no framework in reality to engage, which makes a logical or rational engagement impossible.
Absolutely. And then the media hype continues. Did you hear that Disney Plus is putting out a documentary that lifts up Fauci so that he's this knight in shining armor here to save the day? Yeah.
Well, Anthony Fauci has murdered more people in public office than probably any other American outside of the Department of Defense. When you add up all the deaths from his HIV experiments, when you add up all the deaths from his vaccine obsession, there's no question that he has murdered more people than he has saved, period. That's an absolute statement, and the empirical evidence is nothing but clear there. On his watch, since 1984, on his watch, we have had an increase in allergic conditions among the American population. We have had an increase in infectious disease among the American population. And this is a guy who is supposed to be the director of the National Institute for Allergy and Infectious Disease. Now, here's the problem. He got the job, and what nobody seemed to tell him was this is not about making more allergies and infectious diseases. It's about eliminating them. And he's had $191 billion go through his fingers. And on that watch, he has increased allergic reactions, increased infectious disease, and increased the killing and maiming of people in the name of his obsession with vaccines.
So is there any hope for any kind of trial and justice?
Well, you are looking at the single most relentless American, and for that matter, person in the world, who is actually calling for either U.S. attorneys or attorneys general or the FBI to have anybody who actually will take this accountability to an actual action. The fact of the matter is, law enforcement is required to do this. This cannot be done by a civilian action. It can't be done by a civilian court. And I have been meeting with and sending information to U.S. attorneys and attorneys general. I've had a number of people who have been doing that on their own as well, because I've put all the materials together for people to share. The good news is I just got a letter from a lovely person just yesterday in the mail, old school, double stamp, big envelope. And in that envelope, I received a photocopy of the response that this individual got back from the Attorney General of the state of Connecticut, saying that they had actually made a case file. So it's a public case file. but he sent them to all 50 AGs and he got one response. And the one response he got was from the state of Connecticut. I have sent it to the AGs. I've sent it to the U.S. attorneys. I've sent it to the Office of Inspector General for HHS. I've done all sorts of things. And the fact of the matter is, so far, there's not a single entity that's actually taken it seriously. But you know me, you met me on a very cold day in January.
Yeah.
I am as persistent then as now. This matters because humanity's at stake. So I'm going to keep doing it.
And I also remember what you said to me on that cold day in January when I did say, I feel like the world is upside down right now. And you said, we're going to turn it around. What are some of the things that give you hope, even in spite of or in light of what you just told me?
I wrote a whole book, Lizards Eat Butterflies. And in it, I basically explained why I despise the notion of hope. And I despise the notion of hope because it suggests that there is a better future than there is the present. And my view is that the present is always the best because it is what we have. What I know is that you and I didn't meet each other before the 6th of January, and we have. What I know is that the fellowship I have with amazing people who are standing up and learning to find their voice, learning to stand for what they hold as their truth and their beliefs and their passions and their views of the world, whether it's metaphysical or cosmological or just personal. What I have seen is I have seen this embolden a number of people who did not have a voice before. And so what I see is a number of people who are starting to find their voice, their ability to stand, their ability to take a step, whether it's in public office or whether it's in a public meeting or whether it's in a forum. And Hilda, this is the beautiful humanity that is emerging, the beautiful humanity that's emerging. And by the way, I have to say, and this is not a suck up because this is our interview, it's women who are leading this way more than the men.
Wow.
It is women who are out there on the front lines. It's your voice. It's the Weston Price Foundation. Like, there's a whole bunch of women who are taking a stronger stand than most men. And I really respect that. And I think we need to really take a pause and reflect on the fact that we haven't had a period in our history since suffrage, certainly, where we have had more women who are unwilling to let this one go. So, I have dear friends like Renetta Senham out in Nevada City, California, who is a person who simply will not be cowed into submission. And you have these lovely people, wonderful people who are, once again, finding a place within them that is a place of power and strength and voice and an articulate view and a critical eye and the capacity to have public discourse. And what I find is that that's exactly what we needed. We live in a world right now where we are being cheapened to think of, in the social narrative, we're being told to think of the distinction between men and women as something that gets blurred. What I love about this is the women of substance and the women of character are saying, do not diminish us. We are standing. And so what I see is a great awakening of the power of real women to have the voice that they probably always needed to have, and very few people were listening to it. And so I don't know how you can not be enthusiastic about a future that includes more powerful voices, where people who I think from a social standpoint, we might have expected to be a little more demure and a little more kind of in the shadows are now coming out, being strong and being very vocal. And so, listen, I think this is the best time to be alive. I think we're all here for this reason. And I'm stubborn. You know that. I'm stubborn. I'm going to keep making these comments. I'm going to keep pushing on this thing. And at some point, I know that we'll reach critical mass.
This really is a transformative time. I've experienced it, as you've alluded to, and I think we all have. It's the pressure. And it's like, are we going to crumble or are we going to shine like a diamond?
That's exactly right. It's cliche to say this, but how many times have we heard the metaphor of the reed that bends but is not broken, right? We have bent, and there have been challenges and there have been disappointments and so forth. But genuinely, the quality of the human that is arising is a quality of a human that has been tested and found adequate to stand. And I love that. I just think it's beautiful.
Oh, I do too. And it's encouraging to hear these words and be reminded of them. Even though we are living them, there are times when the pressure does feel like a lot, but it is drawing out something beautiful for all of humanity. And
it is.
It's a beautiful thing to behold, like you said.
Yeah.
Now I want to ask you the final question I often pose at the end.
You bet.
if the listener could do just one thing to improve their health, safeguard their health, if you will, what would you recommend that they do, David?
One less genetically modified anything. Pick whatever it is. I don't care whether it's at the grocery store. I don't care whether it's the farmer's market. I don't care where it is. Nature is beautiful. It breathes, it dances, it's elegant, it goes through cycles. It has its emergent and generative phase. It has its maturation phase. It has its rejuvenation phase. It goes through these beautiful cycles, and it invites us to dance in those cycles with us. And the more we have the capacity to select carefully that which is in harmony with nature, whatever it is, and it can start simple, people. Just start with, if it's in a cardboard box that has a plastic insert, walk away from it. Very, very simple things, because what we need to understand is the long game here is to redefine what life is. And the long game is to redefine life in that we are going to manufacture an industrialized experience that synthesizes life. And the answer is that's not life. That is an industrial production. So the simple thing you can do is choose one less thing that's been modified by the hand of humanity and step back into enjoying the flavor and the taste and the texture and the bruises and the little blemishes and all of the things that make the magic of nature magic. Unwrap your world and eat what nature provided.
Wonderful. Will do. That goes along with the Weston Price Foundation. You know, our heartbeat is whole, real foods, everything that nourishes you best. And that includes conversations like this one. So thank you so much, David.
You are most welcome. Looking forward to seeing you again soon.
Yes, definitely. Our guest today was Dr. David Martin. Visit his website, davidmartin.world, for more. And I'm Hilda Labrada-Gore, the host and producer of this podcast for the Weston A. Price Foundation. You can find me at holistichilda.com. And now for a review from Apple Podcasts. Gratitude from Moms in the Garden. They simply said, very grateful for this thoughtful perspective. You are welcome, Moms in the Garden. You too are invited to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Just click on ratings and review, give us a bunch of stars, and tell us what you think of the show. We read these and we're so thankful for your support. So thank you so much for listening. Stay well, my friend. Hasta pronto.
On behalf of the Weston A. Price Foundation, thanks for listening. We have many free resources to support you on your health journey. Visit westonaprice.org to find podcasts, articles, videos, and more. You can also find a local chapter near you for help in finding sources of great food. We invite you to support the Foundation's mission of education, research, and activism by becoming a member. Thanks again, and take care. Wise Traditions is a project of the Weston A. Price Foundation for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. The content on this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended to substitute for the advice provided by your doctor or other healthcare professional. It is not intended to be, nor does it constitute healthcare or medical advice.